right in front of me. I've seen them catch rabbits. I stopped at a man's box over on the edge of Alexander. I went over there. He sent a lot of money orders, and I was sitting writing the money orders, and he'd have sometimes 8 or 10. And I felt something under my arm, and it was a snake it come off of that mailbox and went under my arm and crawled over on my mail. And I looked the first thing to see if it was poisonous, and it wasn't. It was just a little old ground snake or something. But when he stuck his head up out of that box of mail, I smacked him with a paper and opened the door on the other side and knocked him out in the road and drove off. And I told Mr. Poole the next day, I said, I forgot to leave you. He liked 2 or 3 pennies. I was supposed to leave him change. And I told him what happened. He said, if it had happened to me, I don't think I would have stopped either, he said. But that was probably the most thing in my mind that sticks out was that snake. But I felt it cold when it went under my arm. And I knew what it was because I was just sitting there writing. And it just crawled across my lap and over into my box of mail. And then I got rid of it pretty quick. But that was probably the highlight. But like I say, I saw a lot of wildlife. I saw deer about every day. Wild turkeys, sometimes I've seen them by the hundreds up there where they'd be just gathered into the ground and just be brown with them where they were coming in. And but I enjoyed that because of the wildlife and seeing all them. And the people were wonderful. I tell you that if you had a problem, if you had a car trouble or if you had anything happen, the first person you got to up there to help you. I never had them turn me down. They'd take their car and help you finish your route, or they'd take to go get somebody, or they'd call somebody. They really were really wonderful people to me. They were always real good. And still, when I see them, they are just very nice to me.
Well, let's back up a little bit. Mary Jo, help me out here. Was it Yellow Jacket Lake?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you have any memories of that place?
Yeah, I went down there when it was still, when they were still had little boats and people went there and had picnics and that kind of thing. As a matter of fact, it's kind of across from my house where it was. You just walk across the highway and down. That's a pretty good little ways down there, but it was out off of 18 up here. You went in down here and followed the road around, but from where I live, you could go across and through the woods, and it wasn't but just a step down there now for where I live now. And it went by the way of a lot of things. Back then, people weren't as mobile, I guess, as they are now, and that was pretty much of an outing to go there. And they had a little old boat or something and go and have a picnic or whatever. So, but I remember it.
What about, and this DVD will encompass a lot of communities here in the
Right.
Central District.
Uh-huh.
Do you have any stories, for example, about Boomer or, what was the name of that other, it's in the Brushies? It was Laurel, was it Laurel something? No, what was it? The mill stock paper. Okay.
They took in some post offices, smaller offices, and incorporated them in with Moravian Falls. Poors Knob was one of them. And I had a little bit of the route, and then Route 2 had some of the Poors Knob people. And then I was trying to think, there's one over in Alexander. I went over in Alexander County 2 different times and back in, and then I'd go in and back to Wilkes, and then I went in and came back around by Poors Knob Mountain on the end of the route. And I can't think of the name of that little place over there that over in Alexander, really.
So this was really kind of a main way of people kind of communicating with the, with the outside world.
Oh, yeah. The rural carrier was their people's connection to the outside world, you might say. They'd ordered a lot from the catalog companies. I've delivered bees and queen bees to the bee farm up there. I've delivered chickens, I've delivered turkeys, ducks, anything that they order from the hatcheries would come. And they had one lady that ordered every year. She'd order so many chickens or ducks or whatever from McMurray or something like that. There was a hatchery, and they'd come in the morning, and we'd take them out then. And they were near the end of the route, and I'd have to haul them from 8 o'clock to probably 2. And I tell you, with those chickens, they'd get to you by the time you delivered them. And we had one thing that happened. I had a family over in Cove Gap, and that was very near the end. I was nearly through when I got there. They got a Christmas card that had played music. Something had happened and it was hung. Well, it started playing when it come in the post office that morning, and it was still playing when I delivered it that afternoon. And when I came in the post office, I was humming that song because I'd heard it absolutely all day long. And they were teasing about it, and I said, if you'd heard it as long as I had, it would be in your mind too. But just little things like that, you remember and look back on. But people would try to help me. I had one man that had a little taxidermy shop, and a lot of times I'd have a tire about half flat, or I'd have flat tires, and I have had as many as 2 in a day. And he bored a hole in the wall and put me a air hose out so I could air up my tire when I got over to his place. And then I had several people. I knew wherever anybody that had an air hose or air compressor, I knew where I could get an air for my tires. And I have repaired them out on the route. I just lay down and plug them. I carried my plugs and stuff with me. And then I had a little compressor that plugged in my cigarette lighter, and I'd air up my tires and come on. And so we had to kind of improvise as we went along. But it was an experience. I wouldn't take nothing for it, really. But the people were wonderful. They really were. And
let me ask you this, because we've
Okay.
gone to the near the end of this tape. You had some notes, and did we cover everything that you wanted to cover?
the community house, that was kind of a big thing here. It's where the water office is now was a community house, and it was a scout hut at one time. It was a library at one time. They had a good library there. Then there was a house just past it on the street going into the school, the Bob Pearson house, and they used it as a scout hut at one time. His wife's name was Judy, and the kids called it Judy Bob House, because of that. And it was there going into the Methodist church, and but it was a scout hut at one time. And I came along. And a lot of people don't remember, but ration stamps. We had ration stamps to get whatever you needed to buy. If it was shoes or meat or tires or gasoline or anything, you had to have a stamp. And
Was that during the war?
this during the war. And when you went, if you got toothpaste was in lead tubes. To get one, you had to take an old one in to trade in to get your toothpaste. If you went downtown to buy it, you had to trade in one. And we still have some of those ration stamps at home. My wife had some, and Ms. Wren Duncan was always the one that issued them for our community. And each family, like I guess each adult, and then maybe one for each kid, I don't know, but you had to have ration stamps to buy stuff during the war, and that was until about 46, I guess, 45 or 6 when they did. And one other thing, we had a bus that ran from North Wilkesboro, and it went to Boomer, and then from back into Moravian Falls into Wilkesboro and into North Wilkesboro. It cost you a dime, 10 cents to ride to town, and it was well used because people couldn't get gas. A lot of people didn't have cars, and that was a way to go to town. They ran in the morning if you had to get there for work. But most of the time it was you could get to your job, and then ran one evening. Then they ran one late at night when we go to a movie. It cost us 12 cents to get in the movie, and so you could ride the bus home for a dime. And they ran about 11:30 or something, so they catch all of the late movies, and you could get to the bus and get home in the evening. So. And when you got down to Wilkesboro at the city limits, it cost you a nickel then to ride on into town, and you'd stop down there and there'd be 10 or 15 people get on because they'd walk a little ways to get down to the city limits so they could save a nickel, to get in. And
Let me ask you, you had only been about 4 or 5 years old. Do you remember anything about the flood?
yes, sir. I remember going there where Dr. Kahn's office is, going down right along about there. We went down there, and the water was from there. You could see over to North Wilkesboro, just a solid, like a river. And John Irving's barn was down under the hill there, and you could just see the little top of I call it a little doghouse, like on top. And I remember we could see that. And of course, you could hear big rocks hitting together and that kind of thing. But I remember that much of it, just going down to see it. My uncle took us down there, and he and somebody got in a boat and went out there. There was I can't remember if it was a pig or a dog or something was on that barn, and they went out in a boat and got it because it had got to there. And of course, it was just about 2 feet out of the water, and they got that and brought it into the shore. So that in a boat, I remember that. Of course, I was just a boy, really, 4 years old, but I remember that much about it.
Last question for you.
Right.
In your 72 years of living, pretty much most of it here in Wilkes
Right.
County, except for Taylorsville, you're telling me a little bit in a
Yeah, I was in the Marine Corps for 4 years. I went in May of 1956 and got out in May of '60, and I got to see a lot of the world. I got to go to Hawaii. I went to Puerto Rico, and then we were sent to Beirut, Lebanon in 1958. The president sent us there. They had an uprising, and I stayed ashore 77 days in Beirut, Lebanon, and then Italy. Got to see some places in Italy.
So on that, and I just have a minute left.
All right.
What has changed the most in 72 years here in Wilkes County?
Transportation, I guess. I mean, really, because when I was a boy, there was just not much transportation going. But now people are so mobile. Electronically, I guess, is the big thing that's changed. Everybody with a cell phone, and I can remember when we had a phone and you had to ring it, and you had 2 shorts and a long, or 2 longs and a short, and you had party lines. It'd be 8 people or 4 people on your line, and not too many people had phones. You'd have to go hunt one, really. But now everybody's got one on their side, and so I guess that electronically and transportation is really the 2 things that's changed.